I think all of us see this in the modern American workplace. Yeah. We are constantly distracted at work, and there's a whole section in the book about how to build an indistractable workplace. And what's so fascinating about this is that turns out, once again, we love to blame the proximal causes. We love to blame the symptom as opposed to diagnosing the disease. And when it comes to distraction in the workplace, there's actually no correlation with the technology used and the amount of distraction in the workplace. Great example of this is Slack. When I was researching this book, number one most distracting technology was email, which is interesting because it's not new. Email's been around since the 1970s, but people find it very, very distracting. The second most distracting technology that people kept bringing up was Slack or some other group chat app. Slack happens to be the biggest one. And so I went to pay Slack a visit. And I went to Slack headquarters, and I assumed that if the technology was causing the problem of distraction, well, nobody uses Slack more than the people who work at Slack. They should be the most distracted people on earth. But that's not what I found. That in fact, if you use Slack on nights and weekends, you are reprimanded. That is not what they do there. And it turns out that they have this amazing workplace culture that helps them stay focused. And what I discovered was that in reality, the problem of distraction in the workplace is a symptom of dysfunctional company culture. It's not about the technology. A healthy company culture doesn't struggle with this problem of distraction. And Slack happens to be a company that has a fantastic workplace culture. They're consistently rated as one of the best places in America to work, according to their employees. And they exhibit these three attributes of a company with a healthy company culture. Number one, they give employees psychological safety. Psychological safety has been studied extensively. There was a great project at Google that studied this, that found the highest performing case teams at Google were not the smartest people. Right? We always say, hire A players and get the best people in a room. That's going to make a great team. Not true. Google did this. They had a Nobel laureate and a 10x engineer and the best of the best in a room. They did not produce the best results. The teams that produced the best results were the ones that gave employees psychological safety. Psychological safety is the ability to talk about concerns, to talk about problems without fear of retribution, without fear of getting fired. It's when people can't talk about their problems, that's the real problem, including the problem with distraction. It's not the tech distraction that's the problem. It's the problem of not being able to talk about the problem.
Okay.
So Slack exhibits that. They encourage this kind of commentary. They want people to have the psychological safety. They don't fire people when they voice concerns. When we look at Boeing with the 787 disaster or Enron, there are always people in the company who knew something wasn't right and they didn't want to speak up because they were afraid they're going to get fired.
Okay.
The second thing they do is they give people a forum, a place to voice their concerns. So at Slack, here's how they do it. They have Slack channels where people can talk about stuff that bothers them at Slack. It's called Beef Tweets. It's a channel where people can post beef about the company.
Okay.
And management will go into that Slack channel and acknowledge that they are doing something about those problems. They'll leave a check mark, the emoji, check mark emoji. They'll use emoji eyes to tell them that I've seen that problem. They don't always fix everything in that channel, but giving people the agency, back to what we talked about earlier about high control, low agency.
Yeah.
When people feel like, oh, my concerns are registered, I have control over the situation, the boss saw what I was talking about and is doing something about it, that gives people a sense of agency and autonomy in doing something about these problems. And then third, and perhaps most importantly, the company executives exemplify what it means to be indistractable. So when I talk to managers at Slack, they told me they don't use their device in the middle of meetings. They want to set that example. That's not what we do here at Slack. When you walk into company headquarters, I couldn't believe this, you will see on the wall of Slack HQ, it says in big pink letters, it says, work hard and go home. I have a picture of it in the book. It says this on the company wall because everybody in the organization, from Stuart Butterfield on down, culture flows downhill. So management on down believes in this principle that to do our best work, we have to be focused while we're at work, and then we have to leave people alone after work.
Right. That should be the tagline for your book.
Isn't it great?
That's the same thing you're saying in your book.
Work hard
and go home. So don't be distracted.
Yeah.
Focus on your work and then focus on your play.
Right.
But don't be distracted by one or the other.
That's exactly right. The trouble is, and I will admit this, that there's only so much you can do yourself, right? If I can teach you how to become indistractable, and that's what the first half of the book is about, is what you can do as an individual, and you should absolutely do those things. But we have to be honest with ourselves too that we operate in environments, and environments can shape our behavior. If your boss calls you at 8 p.m. on a Friday night, you have to pick it up, right? If you want to keep your job. But do we blame the telephone, the technology that our boss used to call us at 8 p.m.? Or do we blame the fact that he's a jerk and we work at a company with crappy company culture that doesn't acknowledge work hard and go home? Right. And so the real problem, it turns out, again, it's not the technology. It's the fact we can't talk about the problem. If I say to folks, hey, I don't like the fact that I have to work 30 hours out of the office on nights and weekends. That's where I have to get work done. The fact that we can't talk about this problem without people thinking we're lazy or that we're slackers, that is the problem, right? So these companies that give people psychological safety enough to talk about the problem and find solutions for it. This is a problem like any other problem. And it turns out if we can talk about it, if we have a regular forum for it, and if management exemplifies that this is important, that's how we fix it.
Okay, that's super powerful. Is the next book going to be a company culture book?
It might. I think I put enough in this one that it should appeal to companies, I hope. Now look, some companies won't change, right? Some companies, they have this ridiculous idea that that giving people psychological safety somehow will do bad stuff. I don't agree. But by the way, I am not advocating for working less. That's not what I'm advocating for. I don't think we should have these laws like they have in France that says, okay, 35 hours, that's it by law. I don't agree with that. If you want to go be an investment banker, if you want to go work at a startup, and you want to work 70, 80 hours a week, go for it. I'm not going to tell you otherwise. What I have a problem with is this bait and switch, right? That between employees and their employers, there's a basic contract. You give me your time and your efforts, I will give you money. But if you get a job that you think is only going to require 40 hours a week, but then you get there and you say, oh, it's 40 hours a week in the office, but I'm expected to do 30, 40 hours a week outside the office and work nights and weekends. That's a trick. That's a bait and switch. And that's not ethical. And so that's what I have a problem with, is this mismatch of expectations.
Okay, gotcha. Do you miss teaching?
I still teach, but I teach groups. I teach private as opposed to in the educational setting.
Okay.
I mean in the university
setting. Do you miss being in the university? Or had you've been there quite a while?
Yeah.
10 years?
There's something really wonderful about teaching to an audience that can put your techniques to use right away. So when I teach corporates, and they're trying to make a product that is not engaging into something that is engaging, and then they realize, that's what we've been missing. To see the lights go off is amazing. And when you teach grad students or undergrads, it's, are you teaching towards the test? Is this, is this really important? I've never had to build a product. I don't really know how to apply this. It's nice, it's great. But it's not as satisfying as seeing light bulbs go off.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, and just really quickly back to culture, do you think a company can change their company culture, especially if they have a few hundred people? Because we saw, Uber, everyone's talking about Uber and has this company culture and they get rid of the CEO and blah, blah, blah. But the people say you can't change a culture. It's what created that company over 10 years.
Yeah.
Or you can't change it immediately. It's like steering a big tanker.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
It's not easy. It doesn't happen immediately, but it's absolutely possible. And I give a case study in the book of the Boston Consulting Group. And just so happened to be that my first job out of undergrad was at BCG. Okay. BCG is a top 3 consulting firm, along with McKinsey and Bain. Very hard charging culture when I worked there. I worked there back in 2001. And I'll be honest with you, it was a pretty horrible place. I mean, we were always connected. We had BlackBerries rather than iPhones, but we were always on. Very high employee turnover. People didn't last very long. I lasted my 2 years and I got out of there. It was tough. It was a really tough place. Interestingly enough, this same company, a few years after I left, there was a wonderful researcher by the name of Leslie Perlow, who was at Harvard Business School. And she came to the Boston office of the Boston Consulting Group, and she wanted to run a little experiment. She wanted to see what would happen if one case team of just 8 people tried to implement this idea of giving everyone on the team one predictable night off per week. She called it PTO, predictable time off. And at first, people said, she met with George Martin, the head of the office there, and he said, first of all, he said, get your hands off my teams, go to someone else's team. Because he wasn't a believer that this was a good idea. And the response from the team that she finally found to try this experiment on was, we can't do that here. We are an international organization. We are customer service. We're in the customer service business. We have to respond instantaneously to our customers if they need something from us. And she said, okay. Imagine you're a consulting firm, okay? You're a big 3 consulting firm. What if this isn't about you. IBM, Delta Airlines, somebody comes to you and says, hey, here's a challenge. How do we give everyone one night off per week? How do we do this? Don't think about it as your problem. Think about it as a problem that somebody else has. They say, okay, we're consultants. We can do this now. They sat down together. They actually solved this problem very, very quickly. What was interesting, what Perlow's research discovered, that it was the process of opening the discussion about the problem of distraction, about giving people time off, that solved the problem. It was just the discussion. The tactics, again, weren't that important. You know, they could figure it out. They're smart people. Anybody can figure this out. Okay, make sure Jim covers for Janet or whatever else. Use this technique or that technique. That wasn't the important part. It was opening up the conversation. Now, not only did they solve this problem very quickly of predictable time off, amazingly enough, they discovered that once they had the psychological safety, the forum to talk about this problem, that management prioritized this and made it and exemplified what it meant to be indistractable, when they opened up the closet and started looking at all the other things that were going wrong at the company and people felt the psychological safety to talk about those things without fear of getting fired, the floodgates opened. People were keeping secrets, the unmentionables at every company, right? It's the same thing at a dysfunctional company, just like a dysfunctional family. There are those things we're not supposed to talk about, but that is the real problem, that we're not supposed to talk about them. So when people started to talk about these things without fear that they'd get fired, not only did they reduce employee turnover, they kept employees longer, they found all these ways to improve customer satisfaction, to make a better product for their customers because people felt safe talking about this along with many, many other problems. So it started out as a company with a very high employee turnover rate, one that people did not like working at. From one case team, people saw how much more productive that case team was, how much people wanted to stay on that case team, and they started to roll this out to other case teams. It kind of went viral. And today it's something that's done across the enterprise. And today, Boston Consulting Group is rated on Glassdoor, so it's by their own employees, as one of America's best places to work.